Aperture.
Hello, thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Michael Famighetti. I'm the editor of Aperture magazine. For those of you who are not familiar with Aperture, we were founded in 1952 by a group of artists, writers, and curators as a common ground for photography. Aperture today is a multi-platform publisher that unites the photography community in print, in person, and online. Tonight, we are excited to host the second public program connected to our current issue titled Latinx, guest edited by Pilar Tompkins Rivas, who is the chief curator and deputy director of curatorial and collections at the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art in Los Angeles. This monumental issue of the magazine is full of incredible writing and photographs and spans a century of image making, connecting historical and contemporary photography, covering the themes of political resistance, family and community, fashion and culture, and the complexity of identity in American life. It also features the powerful contributions of three photographers who we are very lucky to have here with us tonight to discuss their work. Genesis Báez is an artist based in Brooklyn, raised in both the Northeastern US and Puerto Rico. She has exhibited her work internationally, most recently at Arco Madrid. Báez holds an MFA from Yale and is an alum of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. She currently teaches photography at Pratt. Joiri Minaya is a New York-based Dominican United Statesian multidisciplinary visual artist. She attended the INAV Santo Domingo, the Altos de Chavon School, and Parsons the New School. Her work has been exhibited across the US, the Dominican Republic, and the Caribbean. Steven Molina Contreras received his BFA in photography from the Fashion Institute of Technology, and he has held residencies at both Lightwork and Silver Art projects. He has been invited to lecture at Stanford, Pratt, Marble Hill Camera Club, among other institutions. It has been a privilege to work with these three powerful image makers, and I hope you seek out their portfolios published in the Latinx issue of the magazine. And we are very honored that tonight's program will be moderated by Karla Cornejo Villavicencio, an Ecuadorian American writer and the author of The Undocumented Americans, published in 2020. She has written about immigration, music, beauty, and mental illness for many publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, N+1, among others. In 2020, she was shortlisted for the National Book Award for Nonfiction. Thank you so much, Karla, for being here with us tonight. Aperture is a not-for-profit publication, and crucial support is provided by the Kanakia Foundation, by John Stryker and Slobodan Randelovich, and by Thomas and Susan Dunn. Lead support for the Latinx issue is provided by the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation, and further generous support is provided by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and the New York State Council on the Arts. But the easiest way to support Aperture is to subscribe to the magazine. Subscribers are what keep the magazine going. Please be sure to submit any questions you may have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them towards the end of the evening. And now I'd like to hand it over to Karla. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Michael. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I don't know anything about photography. So I actually think this might be a really interesting conversation if things go okay. I was asked to write about one of our photographers' recent, so I'm going to be using terms that are like probably maybe synonymous with like writing, okay? I looked at his collection of photos and I wrote something about it. And I was really scared because I didn't want to seem foolish. When I was like 15, I wrote about jazz and I also didn't know anything about jazz. But something that really struck me, aside from how great Steven's photographs were, is that he's my little brother's age. And I was like, it felt really inspiring to see someone so young do such amazing art at the get-go, and for all of these brilliant publications. And today I was listening to a podcast about Sylvia Plath, and it hadn't occurred to me, I hadn't thought about it in a really long time, that she died when she was 30. And that seemed to me when I was younger that was maybe an appropriate age to die, even though, how she died was not great. But now I realized how young she was and how, robbed of so much art we were. I remember there was a line in one of her journals that was, "I think I would like to call myself the girl who wanted to be God." And I thought about how different the bell jar is from the way that people usually talk about her work, which is either entirely as biography, entirely as, the art being sort of a transliteration of what was going on in her life and in her mind, or entirely as text, entirely as art, which is, I think, one of the great injustices that has been done to her work. And so I want to ask lots of questions about their work as young artists that are carving out a space that's really paving new roads for themselves and for future Latinx artists and photographers. But I want to leave to you how you want to bring about the subject of being Latinx, or how Latinidad falls into your work. Often I find that when I talk to other artists that are Latinx, we have a lot of stuff in common, right? And it's good to talk amongst us, but I'm just really excited to meet other young artists and ask them, what their desks are like. And it's having that community that I think is really rare and is valuable when you meet other artists with backgrounds like ours. So I'm very excited and very honored that I was asked to do this. Should I begin right ahead with the questions?
Sounds great.
Okay. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, when around how old were you? When was the first time that you were able to use better quality materials in your work, like better quality equipment or materials, and what was sort of the difference in your work before and after? Like I'm thinking in terms of the graininess of photos once you blow them up, or the resolution or the cropping. How did you work when you were first starting out as an artist with materials of maybe a lesser quality? Did you have to use your imagination more? Where did you get the resources when you first started out?
For me, when I first started out, it was right when I had chosen to do photography as like a field of study at a college, which wasn't anything crazy or I had imagined while I was in high school. But I did it while I was in high school in like 2015, 2016. And my mom saved up to buy like a classic, not really great Canon Rebel T5i. And that was like the first space where I was given a camera that was very serious in my own. That I could make pictures. Although it's not the camera that I work with on now. I got that opportunity and privilege in college when I was being introduced to photography as an art form and as a way to communicate ideas. But the first time that somebody gave me a higher quality item to work with photography and that felt my own was my mother. And it was a pretty big deal too, because we don't do like big Christmas gifts. And that was something that she wanted to give me, and some trust that she also gave to.
How did she know which camera to get?
She DM'd, I think she either texted my high school photography teacher because we were really close. She was also my musical theater director, so she was like a second mother. And I think she also, my older sister did photography before me in high school as well. So I think it was like a mix of like all these women who were just like figuring out which camera to get, but she just ended up going with the classic Rebel, which I feel like a lot of amazing photographers started on a Rebel.
Okay, I'll ask one of the questions. I think I'll just like,
Oh, I wanted to talk about that. Sorry. Is it okay if yeah.
oh, yeah.
Oh, are we going in turns?
No.
I'm sorry. Okay. I wanted to say that I'm an interdisciplinary artist, so I didn't really start off of photography. I use a camera in my work sometimes, although the series that is featured in the publication is actually not using a camera, but using existing photos and making collage out of them. But I love the question because it makes me reflect on my relationship with I don't know, medium and choices in the medium that I'm using. Specifically to this series, I'm using photos that are found on the internet and photos that come from archives that I don't have physical access to necessarily, also mixed with postcards that I collected and I scanned in like a very high resolution scanner. So it's interesting to see like the juxtaposition of visual languages. And in my, let's say, school education of arts, I became very interested in archivability and like good materials and like getting the best pigments, because you learn, I guess part of seeing the worth in your own work is learning that it should be preserved and that institutions should be interested in collecting what you're making. And then at the same time, dealing with these images now, and since I think something like 2015, when I made an installation called #Dominican Women Google Search, that was using images from that Google search to like print them out and like blow them up to human proportions, and they became pixelated. I became very interested in pixelation as a language also, and like poor resolution as a language also. So that's something that definitely affects the work that I'm making now, specifically the series that is there. Yeah, I guess like I'm the wild card in the sense of like not coming through the photography, you know.
Yeah, I'm interested in like the use of the postcards, for example. I think that there's something, I know that a lot of different artists use materials that have had like a previous life, but in this case, like I want to look up your #Dominican Women Google search.
Mhm.
So I want to look that up because there I feel like it's you know, these images that have existed before the eyes of many, you know, many people. And here are these postcards that have also existed, have had these previous lives as subjects of a gaze that, you know, kind of sucks. So like,
Yeah.
how do you take something with that kind of like historical baggage and energy and darkness? And do you think it brings something to your work that you're working with? And is there something difficult about working with sources like that?
Yeah, totally. It is difficult, and at the same time it's kind of liberating because it's naming and calling something out that is kind of comes from my experience of being an immigrant, or even being a woman in the Dominican Republic and being hypersexualized, and like all of this confluence of experiences that are mirrored in these images that are produced that inform people's ideas of what supposedly I am or how they read me. Like all of these codes that we kind of don't control because they exist before us in the ways that images have been made. So it's exciting for me to engage with those images that exist and contextualize them and insert in maybe an idea of disconnection or a glitch or a intentional subversion in them, because it's interesting to me to use a code that people recognize and then put it in a way that makes them question what they thought it meant or how they read it. So that's a lot of what I try to do in several of my works, but specifically in this series as well. But yeah, it's definitely difficult, and it's also like, I guess it comes from the experience of making work and still being read as like Caribbean, Latina woman, like all of these things. So this type of work is kind of like, okay, you're gonna read me like this anyways, I'm going to confront you with whatever you're projecting, and then try to insert the universality and multiplicity and subversion that I wish to express through those codes and through that language. But I also feel like I also want to get to a different body of work where I am over this, and like now I can explore these other things because I've had this conversation already.
Yeah, I understand that. What are your inspirations outside? I feel like I'm taking you all out on a date. What are your inspirations outside of the visual world?
I just want to super quickly speak a little bit to the question about material. I wasn't sure at first if you were asking a specific artist. Yeah, sure. But when I think about material and my work, like the type of film I'm using or the type of camera that I'm using, I feel like there's a direct correlation with my body. And what I mean by that is when I started making pictures, I photographed on disposable cameras, and those I would get prints at the drugstore that I would hold and I would put in space, and they were small, so I had to be close to them in order to see them and to read them, right? And so as my tools have shifted and changed throughout time, so have my my physical relationship to the work, right? Because different cameras have larger, the larger the resolution, the larger I can make a print, and the larger the print, it's like totally different. It generates a different kind of meaning and a different kind of relationship in a space. I think a lot about how like I interact with the work and how that's like rooted in the material.
Thank you. Steven, what are, I think I may have asked you this when I interviewed you, what are some of your other inspirations outside of photography?
Outside of photography, well, at the moment, I've been getting into these two poems that a friend of mine had introduced me to, by Humberto Acabal, and then also another one by, if I could find the note here, what's it called? Another book by, I can't read it. Claribel Alegría. So these two poems, and honestly, it's been hard to find a little inspiration lately, like outside of photography, mostly because I rely on it so much to try to like kind of center and bring me into a place, because life is hectic and life is crazy. But these two poems, which are loosely about an experience, an outer body experience, witnessing humanity around, and also like thinking about, and one of the poems is thinking about like the fire that drives you to make the art that you're making, or your heart, have been like keeping me pretty grounded. And outside of that, I think just like, kind of keeping in tune with like a lot of photo books and a lot of things that I've, taken inspiration and direction from. If I'm gonna be honest, it's really where lately I've been at. And I've also been rereading All About Love quite often. And I found inspiration, even when preparing for this talk today, from your book, Karla, specifically just like chapter 1 in the Undocumented Americans, and the way that you kind of had walked through your journey and trying to find community for both undocumented and documented spaces, and the questions that you were asking around migrants and the way that we see each other. So those are some things that I've been like rereading and thinking about a lot lately that I've loved.
Thanks for the plug, Steven. I wanted to ask you all what your relationship to looking is like, and whether you can turn that off. Like whether you're like hanging out with your family or your significant other, and you're like looking as a photographer and they're like, please turn that off. Do you have to do things, like that take hours, like bathe and snack or whatever to like get yourself into the place where you can see as a photographer? Like, what is that like?
I'm gonna jump in. I feel like, I don't know if I can turn it off. I mean, not as a photographer, but as a visual artist in general. Like, I'm always thinking about the potential of what I'm seeing being translated into some sort of art, something. But also I'm confronted with the exhaustion that means. And then at some point it kind of just, it's, I don't know. At some point it's like you're experiencing something that you want to translate and share with the world. But at the same time, part of that thought process of like trying to capture it is kind of blocking you from the experience itself, like being fully in. So I don't know if that's a conscious decision, but I do transition between those two spaces. I don't know if it's something that I can turn on or off, but I've definitely been in both of the, situations.
Yeah, like sometimes I'm in situations where I literally need to pump the brakes on myself, like switch gears mentally, be like, no, this is, stop observing that texture. That's not what we're doing right now. But lately, that's kind of become easier because I feel that at the end of the day, all kinds of sensorial experiences make their way into the work eventually. For example, in the last year, I've been keeping a weather journal. I write about the weather every day and my interactions with water and the weather. Just as a practice. And it's quite striking to see how some of those things then end up making their way into the work later on, kind of subconsciously, right? So at first it was difficult to trust that process of I don't have to be consciously thinking about looking all of the time and framing things and making pictures, but that trusting that the experiences that I have will kind of, I become a part of me and then make their way into the work. That's been liberating.
I feel like for me, my relationship to looking lately, at least when it comes to the body of work that's published here and the body of work that I'm working through, I learned the images from the portfolio. I feel like it's pretty reserved for the most part, in the sense that I make work right now in two specific places in between my home in Long Island and also in El Salvador, that really I only enter that like intense period of looking when I'm plugged into the space where I can be like a full witness and I can really kind of explore it and get curious and get excited about what's around me. And I've liked that a lot lately because I feel like sometimes, especially trying to navigate like as a young Latino and as a young, as somebody who's just trying to navigate this space that's so weird and conflated and that they didn't know about much, I don't want to overexhaust myself like too much and oversee and then not be able to, be present for the pictures that I really want to make and that I need to be present for. So as of late, I feel like I've been more reserved in looking because I want to be fully present when I go and I collaborate with my family. Because a lot of them at times I'm reconnecting or meeting for the first time. And a lot of them are also, it's the first time that they're ever, elevating themselves to a place with a photograph, interacting with it in a very serious, like Facebook documentary, like, or regular documentary way where it's like we're all active and trying to make a picture together that we feel works, or I feel works too. So I've been trying to just practice that mindfulness and that reservation as I've been making this work, because it can be really difficult. Especially when there's like a lot of tension inside of me as somebody who wants to be in two places, right? El Salvador and here, and have all these worlds kind of combined together, and how I'm trying to process that. So I've been trying to reserve so that I can be there and I can be a witness to the people that I'm working with, my family.
Do you view art, photography, or in this case, visual art as, or how do you view it in terms of it being an art, but also is it something you do full time for a living? Is it, your relationship to it as a career? And obviously we know that there are many things that make pursuing art to any major degree in your life difficult, and one of them is resources and time, and the time that it takes to become good. So I wanted to ask about that. About the first part is like, how do you think about it as an art, something that you do for yourself, or is it something that how much of it is something that you're doing full time, and or if not, is it something you want? Are there any obstacles to it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's really fluid. Like sometimes it's the container for my creative expression, for the way in which the poetry I want to share with the world kind of takes form. And then other times it's a way to make money. Someone needs me to photograph these objects, and like I have these skills, I will use them for that. So yeah, it's fluid. I think photography is interesting in that way, that it takes on, it occupies so many spaces in our world. It's not just art. I mean, you can go into a doctor's office and there's photography. The milk carton has photography. This is photography right now, so photography is just so like versatile. And yeah, sometimes it's my creative expression, and sometimes it's like how I make my rent money. And I think, yeah, that fluidity feels good to me.
Is it ever journalism for any of you, or like, do you use journalistic techniques in your work?
I feel like I engage with like the aesthetic and the history of like what you could call or what you would classify as journalism or photo documentary, that in between space where things elevate from like a nonfiction fiction and are in the middle. But I do think it's an interesting conversation also, an interesting question to ask you guys too, where it's like, sometimes I feel like just because I'm photographing people who are Latino or who might be from, just different backgrounds, that people perceive the work as some form of photojournalism, which I don't really know what that means, because I think that takes a complete different mindset and a complete different drive. And it's been interesting to see some people perceive some of my work in that photojournalism sphere, because it's like, Latino brown people out in different spaces, and people desire some form of truth from us all the time, that everything has to be displayed in an image. So it's interesting to think about that. So I somehow use or try to engage with the aesthetic of it, but I'm also curious to hear how you all feel, or if that has been any perception of your work as Latina and Latino image makers.
I have a lot of thoughts, both on what you just said and also about what Karla asked initially. So at the moment, I am doing this full time. However, that is very volatile. It depends a lot on circumstances, whether I got a grant or not, whether, what else is going on that is like financially supporting me. It's like a very unstable position. I don't know if it's something, I hope it's something I can continue doing, but it depends. So when I can't do this full time, I'm also an educator. I have worked taking photos, even though that's not my main trade. I worked doing design. So yeah, it's something that I guess I've been fighting my whole life, like the circumstances that are getting in the way of me making this full time. And it's something that I was strongly aware of when I was, especially in school here in the States, because there's this system of like internships that is encouraged. And at the time, there was no conversation as present as it is today about paid internships. And that was very stark to me, how some people could, just donate their time for whatever person or organization or artist, like several hours a week. Where I was like in New York with my family sending Dominican pesos that don't really translate to dollars here in the way that, up until the point where I had to work because it wasn't sustainable. So it's like that, as you were talking about, maybe the privilege position of someone making art. I hate that that's true, but also like I want to fight for that space when we have that opportunity. And something that Steven said about this idea of as Latinos, you have to kind of offer this truthfulness, or people want to read you as that, and that insistence on the like photojournalistic gaze, I guess, on your work. I find that interesting. I don't think it manifests in my work in the same way, but as I was saying before, it's definitely something that is expected in other ways in terms of like the work that I'm making, filling in, some sort of quota about Latinx or gender or brownness, blackness, or whatever identity form that people want to read in your work. And those are things that I am interested in talking about. But then when it becomes the only way that you can see my work, then it's problematic,
Yeah, I think I was originally drawn to photography from looking at and studying photojournalism. Actually, like as a young person, I thought to myself like, oh, I guess like I want to be a photojournalist. I like people, I like cameras. I guess this is what I'm going to do. And I think now looking back on it, I think what I was initially drawn to was my ability to work with everything that was around me, right? That just like even the mundane, just like the minutia of the everyday is material or can be a material. And the camera kind of facilitating a deeper engagement with your environment. So I think there was a moment where a differentiation began to emerge, right? Between, like, I'm not trying to report on anything for anyone. Like, I'm not trying to teach anybody about some, X, Y, and Z. I'm not like a liaison. I am not trying to speak for other people, right? But rather that I can use like what's around me in a poetic way, right? I can build and describe fictions with like the tangible, real world around me, and that relationship is really interesting to me.
Thank you. I think that what we should do as Latinx artists is, the girl boss, gatekeep, and gaslight is like we make the art, we just don't talk about our Latinidad, and they hire us and book us for like what is it called? National Hispanic Day, Hispanic Heritage Day. And we take the money from Goldman Sachs and we're like, yes, we're doing the mariachi thing. And then you just don't do it. You just don't do it. I wanted to ask you who you think in your generation is making really exciting or interesting work that you are really excited by.
For me, it's definitely what's it called? The group of classmates that I graduated with from FIT. If I'm thinking about somebody that I know or that's in my age group, I can think of a handful of them whose visual language share or are connected to. Off the top of my mind, Ryan Frigilana and Andy Salkin, two artists who are equally devoted to at least exploring a part of their identity, but also just making really beautiful and thought-provoking art or things out in the world. So for me, it's like the handful of classmates that I still really respect now.
I'm so not ready for this question. There's a lot of people going through my head also in like all sorts of mediums, but I'm just gonna mention 3 photographers because it's a photo panel. Widlin Cadet, she's been recently doing a residency at the Studio Museum. Elliot Jerome Brown and El Perez are photographers that I admire a lot. And I'm probably forgetting a bunch of people, but it's just like.
El Perez photographed me.
Oh, that's incredible. I haven't seen that image. I'm gonna look it up.
Don't.
Okay.
No, it's a gorgeous photo. It's a gorgeous photo. I was just going through a green hair phase. Yes, Genesis.
Yeah, sure. Oh, so many people. I can't answer. I can't fully do justice to that question. I love all of you out there. I really do. But just like immediately a couple people who popped into my head in terms of how they're actually working across mediums and using photography, but also making like really beautiful books that incorporate film stills from their videos and their performances alongside photos are Shayla Miller, Farah Al-Qasimi, Woodleen, also a huge fan as well, and my good friend Jenny Kalivas. I've been thinking about her work a lot, her self-portraits while buried series, and also all of those artists are engaging with performance in a way, which I find really interesting.
Thank you. So what was the first photograph?
That we made?
No. I think like the first human photograph.
Oh, I think it was like of a rooftop. It was like a daguerreotype. Let's see. The world. Let's Google it.
What you mean, like the first photo in history, or the first photo that we saw, or
that
If
we
you
like,
want to make it about yourselves, you can. I mean, I was asking about the first photo.
oh, you're like the historically.
Mhm.
I have no idea.
with the Niepce, wasn't that, it's like alleged, right? That is the first photograph. There are other parts of the world that are not as European that had versions of photography or some silver process, but alleged Niepce.
Right. And it was also fixed, right? Because there were, I mean, camera obscuras and all kinds of forms of photography existed before, but they weren't always able to fix the image.
And what were your like first, project that you would claim as your first project that you would claim,
For me, it was Mi Familia Migrante, which is my immigrant family, which predated Adelante, but really established like what I was interested in: my use of mirrors, my use of domestic spaces between El Salvador and New York, playing around with black and white and color aesthetics within the same edit. And that one was the first project that I had printed, and I was just like really terrible 8x10 inkjet prints in undergrad, where I was like, there's something of value here that I'm placing by doing this process and by printing and collaborating with my family. And then, it transitions to this next project, which is Adelante, and it translates to Forward, which starts to think about my family's journey, at least here and in El Salvador, and what even moving forward or what that concept really costs in the end, and what sort of things come with it, and complicating it with photography and portraiture. So those two were my first, where I was like, this is something that I want to print and it be a part of the real world and hang up in my wall and offer my family as some form of like fire or some sacrifice in a fire, some sort of gift. Yeah, so these two, which Aperture first had published part of Mi Familia Migrante, and which led to the connection of doing Adelante now too. So it's been really interesting to watch that work travel two spaces.
I forgot, I just thought of like one artist that I should have mentioned when you ask about photographers. Emil Rivera is a Dominican photographer that I also really admire. Yeah, I'll go back to thinking about my first photograph now.
Are there is there anything you're excited about that you're working on now that you would not mind sharing? Any of you?
Right now, I'm working through a maquette, a little just DIY edit of Adelante as a bigger project, kind of sort of dreamscaping that, and seeing what the final, whatever that means, version of the project will look like. And then other than that, I'm just trying to survive being 23.
Yeah, I'm currently I haven't been making pictures with people recently, which is interesting because most of the photos in the publication are portraits. But usually my pictures with people coexist with or are kind of experienced next to these still lives that I create with mirrors, where I'm kind of fragmenting the space and creating illusion of space where space doesn't actually exist. So light, shadow, mirrors in the landscape or in domestic spaces. And I think that the isolation of the last year or so has lent itself to leaning into that process more. So it's like collaging in space. It's really kind of a little different than some of the pictures that were just circulating on the screen a minute ago, but lots of shadows still. The shadows are still there.
Well, thank you all. You, the audience can ask questions in the Q&A. If I like the questions, I'll read them. The first person is Yun Nguyen. This question is for Steven. When and how did you come to the conclusion that you wanted to turn your camera towards your family? How did you feel about that decision?
It came out of a reaction to what was happening like interpersonally in my life. It was during undergrad, and my stepfather was briefly deported while in pursuit of getting some form of citizenship or green card through the marriage of my mother, who was a citizen. So he had left, so then I needed to be at home more frequently. And I was also still an undergrad. So it kind of came at first out of just like fulfilling miscellaneous college assignments for my photo 3 class, I want to say, or photo 4. And through that process, I just continually returned and collaborated with my mother on pictures, and then my sister, and it started just snowballing and becoming bigger as kind of we all opened up in the space. And that was the first time that I decided to turn my camera on my family. It was really weird at first because I don't think like, I didn't really have the language, or I didn't really think I had the language to be able to make pictures that provoked thought. I didn't really think of photography as that because I didn't have like the privilege or the institutional knowledge behind me to see myself or some form of semblance of myself or a language I could craft with photography at the time. But I turned it into that out of a reaction of what was happening interpersonally and capturing and thinking about his absence and my relationship to my family as I needed it to change, but then also his return. And I was also looking a lot at my clear favorite and an artist who I still think is #1 for me, LaToya Ruby Frazier's The Notion of Family, which was one of the first books that gave me some form of direction or language to think about at least, you know, my family's narrative here in the US and El Salvador, and a way to create a language of my own with it. I also, The Sweet Flypaper of Life, I still have that book all the time. I feel like they both marry text and pictures in a way that's pretty beautiful. And complex. So that was the first time that I decided. It came from those influences, and then it just snowballed on and on and on. But it was at first tense, but then my family started getting really excited about it. And my little sister, who was like 1.5, 2 at the time, was also treating the camera like a toy and participating in the process. So that was kind of funny and kept everything going and made us all more interested, because we all at least saw, and I definitely saw it for sure, I could speak to that, the shift in the way that, we valued and wanted to tell our story and wanted to connect with each other. So that was the first time, and since then it's just snowballed on, and it's been really, it's been really incredible and confusing at times too, because you confront a lot in the process of collaborating with family.
Thank you. This question is from Creighton Baxter. This question is for Genesis. Can you talk more about mirrors in your practice and how they've emerged in your work? Does the spatial collaging with reflections you describe have a relationship to your history with portraiture? And if so, how?
Hi, Creighton. I love you. What a great question. So let me think about it for a second. When I think about mirrors, the first thing that comes to mind is that they remind me of water. They're kind of like solid water to me. They are still their whole selves, even when you break them apart, just like water. You can separate water and it's still its whole self. And mirrors, you can break them apart and they still reflect. And I'm just interested in how they open up space into, like open up portals into different spaces and times, right? Like I can flatten, when I'm photographing them or arranging them for a photograph, I can flatten various places and times into one frame. I can show what's behind me, I can show what's in front of me. To be honest, I don't think I've really thought about it yet in relationship to portraiture. I think about it a lot in relationship to water, and in terms of like abstracting and fragmenting physical space, or like disorienting space, or a landscape. But I'm most excited about being able to bring together disparate places into one frame.
Thank you. This question, hold on, okay, this question is for anyone. Wondering what you enjoy most about taking photos, or maybe what is the most fulfilling part about working in this medium today? And then there's, I guess this is like, part B. Do you see your practice moving into other mediums? If so, what bodily senses do you associate with that impulse? That question is a little too much even for me, but what bodily senses do you associate with the transition?
I can kind of answer that question, although in my case it's kind of backwards. Like I came to photography after dealing with all this other bunch of mediums, after, in between, before, like I keep going back and forth. So, but my interest in photography came from probably performance, maybe moving image. I guess I engaged with moving image before I engaged with photography, but and painting, because a lot of the way that people pose in photographs or are captured by photographs also relate to that history of, like, I don't know, composition in paintings and art history. And I feel like those were the entry points for me into photography, coming from art history in like a more fine arts, painting, sculpture, drawing type of way. Yeah.
Yeah, I started making video after making photos for a really long time. And I think for me, it was a bit of a natural progression because so many of my photographs were of movement or they were either an image of a gesture, like quite literally movement, or they had a lot of visual movement in terms of their composition. So it was exciting to, yeah, like delve deeper into other forms of moving image.
We have a question from Marina. While in undergrad, I was strongly encouraged to turn the camera on to my Mexican family. Even though I did want to, I felt uncomfortable by this pressure. My question is for any artist. How do you push past these comments and make the work true to your vision and not what other people wish for you to do?
Yeah, so in undergrad, what's it called? It is a very weird space. It's like coming into like a very like, like there's an institution, there's a group of people that might not be similar to you or that might be interested in your difference for you to make art. For me, I felt that pressure from time to time. But at the same time, it's like one thing about like my Latinidad, like when I was making pictures, I wasn't thinking about this picture needs to be like Latino, this picture needs to be explicitly Salvadoreño, this picture doesn't need to be, like I wasn't, the way to fight that pressure essentially was to like exit the fact that I wasn't bending towards like anyone's expectations of like what I as an artist interested in their culture or connecting with their culture would make or perceive. It is uncomfortable, and there was a few like instances where again folks would look at a high contrast image of, or not a high contrast, but just an edited image of my mother or grandmother and suddenly make comments that were weird or pressuring. But honestly, I just felt like I was just going to make the work regardless. So I alleviated pressure by just ignoring it essentially.
Yeah, make the work for yourself. Don't feel like you have to make work for other people or to like educate other people or something, right? First and foremost, make it for yourself and because it brings joy, and other things. Mhm.
I have a question maybe related to, I don't know if it relates to that, but thinking of like that pressure to perform makes me think of performativity and how each of you deal with this matter. Because for the images that I'm using in the series that is featured in the publication, a lot of the photos come from like touristic brochures or objects. So like you have like people who are smiling. On the other hand, some images come from ethnographic photos, which is, so quote unquote neutral, quote unquote scientific, although we know it's everything but. So their gestures are more like serious. And I'm thinking of like this impulse when people see a camera of smiling for the camera and you taking photos of your subjects. How do you deal with that? I know that Genesis, for example, Genesis, I remember reading that you tell your subjects to repeat gestures. And Steven, when I read Karla's text, there was a quote that resonated with me where she says, "A family is theater of family." So that also brings me back to performativity. And I wonder how each of you like deal with this thing.
Sure. So I'll try to be quick because I know we're running low on time. But when I think about gesture, I think about gesture as a way to give shape to things that we can't see, like a language for the more liminal parts of diasporic existence. It's like through gesture, and some of the pictures in the publication, right? The people are coming apart, coming together. There are cycles, things like this. So the gestures that I'm directing for people are kind of intentional and are rooted in giving shape to like the physical and psychic movement of diasporic life, because those things are kind of invisible, but we can use our bodies to give shape to them. So that's one of many ways in which I'm using, or I'm thinking about gesture and performance. But Steven, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, my relationship to performance now that I'm thinking about it is I just want to feel in the process that we are like all taking a part, that we're all aware that we're collaborating on a depiction that is different, that is thought-provoking, that feels true to our hearts, and that feels true to my heart as like the facilitator, right? The person who's setting the stage, but you know, my family being the ones who are really carrying and who are really delivering the heart in the story. So my relationship to performance comes in as that. I just want to, I desire and I strive for all of us to try to have some form of awareness to what's happening, because I don't think we really get that chance or that privilege to be so fully aware of our own bodies and how they're photographed, to be so fully aware that it's worth having those depictions there and that they can transcend past just the picture of somebody, right? That it can connect, and that that is a great privilege to share and to be aware of. So my relationship to performance comes from that, which I think is from also my little theater kid, Broadway geek at times loving heart, which I just really want to see a beautiful production where everyone feels like they're a part or has lines. And that transcends, right? So.
Well, thank you. It was really nice talking to all three of you and really nice meeting all three of you. I hope our paths cross again and that you will have luck and richness in your future endeavors. Back to Michael.
Hi, I'm stepping in for Michael just to give the closing remarks. Thank you, everyone who tuned in to watch, and thank you, Karla, Genesis, Steven, Joiri, for joining us and being a part of this conversation. And the work in the issue is beautiful, and everybody should get a copy. I also want to let everyone know that we are having our final series on the 24th. We'll be hosting it with the Lucas Museum. Information can be found in the chat. That'll be an excellent conversation as well, so please join us. Thank you again. It's great seeing all of you. I wish we could do this in person, but glad that Zoom exists for this reason. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.